Welcome to Doing Good by Doing Better, the podcast for world shapers, not spectators. I'm Margaret Rogers, CEO of Pariveda, a professional services firm that helps make potential possible for our clients. On this show, I talk with founders, executives, and innovators who share hard lessons, bold ideas, and real strategies for purpose-driven growth. This episode will offer practical insights you can use this week to solve forward. Because at Pariveda, we know that doing good only endures when we keep learning how to do better. Today, I'm with Doug Conant, the founder and CEO of Conant Leadership. Doug is a former Fortune 500 CEO, a New York Times and a Wall Street Journal bestselling author. He's led at the highest levels at major consumer brands such as Campbell Soup Company, Nabisco Foods, and Avon. In this two-part conversation, Doug shares how getting fired was a critical part of his leadership journey. He also talks about what it was like to step into the CEO role at Campbell and inherit the worst employee engagement survey result Gallup had ever seen in a Fortune 500 company. We get into his foundational belief about how to win in the marketplace and what leaders can do when the soft skills become the hardest skills to master. Let's jump in. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Doug, you and I know each other, of course, through the Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance, ALO, when you were there, and of course, with Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose, CECP. And I have the fortune of being able to be part of some of the leadership training that you have created from the ground up. I know you have newer ventures now, and you're just magnetic, right? There's so many things in your experiences that are very rich that I thought it would be so wonderful for our listeners to hear about.
You know, I was waiting to do a program the other day, and I was curious. So I took a quick IQ test and discovered that I'm average. I'm not extraordinary on my IQ, and that really upset me because I always thought I was. And then I said, well, I must have a really good EQ. So then I went over and I took an EQ test, and I found, God, I'm plain vanilla. I'm very ordinary. So I got ordinary IQ, I've got ordinary EQ, but somehow I've been able to connect with organizations and people in a special way that has enabled us to do some pretty special things. But I don't know what it is. You know, I'm just disgustingly ordinary. And I mean, this was just the other day, and my wife is getting tired of talking to me about, I'm just too ordinary. How can I be less ordinary? And somehow maybe being ordinary is part of the sauce, part of the secret sauce. Maybe it is. But Margaret, after we do all this, you're going to help me figure out what is my secret sauce and how can I do more of that to be more effective than I've been. So that's what you're going to owe me out of this.
I love it. I'm happy to be with you here. Now, you say you're ordinary, and yet you had a very extraordinary journey, right?
Absolutely.
In terms of your leadership from your early career, Parker Brothers to Nabisco. I mean, I would love to hear just a brief version of your early career journey and how that influenced you.
Certainly. In my last book, The Blueprint, we landed on this belief that your life story is your leadership story. And my life story from a career perspective is interesting if to no one else but me. I find it interesting. I was quite a good athlete. I went to college at Northwestern University on athletic scholarship. I was able to stay there and work for the athletic department when I graduated and go straight on to get my MBA at the Kellogg School. Graduated when I was 24 years old. I never worked in an office a day in my life. I'd been an athlete, and I was a professional tennis player, and I was a tennis pro. And my advisor who wrote the book on marketing, literally, Philip Kotler was the godfather of modern day marketing in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. And he put his arm around me figuratively, sort of like in the movie The Graduate, when Dustin Hoffman didn't know what he was going to do when he graduated. And this guy at a pool party put his arm around him and said, I have one word for you, plastics. And he was told to go into plastics. That was going to be the next big thing. And Phil Kotler metaphorically put his arm around me and said, I have 2 words for you: brand management. And it was just a new thing then. And I started interviewing with the only 3 consumer packaged goods companies that had product management: Procter & Gamble, General Foods, and General Mills. I received an offer from General Mills, went to work there. And that was 50 years ago. So I've been doing this game for 50 years. I worked for General Mills in marketing for the first 6 years at their home operations in Minneapolis, then went out to a subsidiary, Parker Brothers Toys and Games, where I was fired after 3 years. And that was an incredibly instructive experience. You know, we all have those moments in large organizations where we feel unwanted or rejected, and then we have to find our footing again. It was very important for me to go through that, actually. But ultimately, I went to work for Kraft Foods for 7 years, and I was director of corporate strategy at Kraft, and I just learned so much there. And I saw the power of what an organization could do if it created a culture that really valued talent and creating opportunities for people. The CEO who went on to be chair of Philip Morris was Mike Miles. And I worked for another guy named Jim Kiltz, who was the best business person I've ever worked for. And I learned a ton, but I hungered to run something, not be a director of strategy. And I had an opportunity to go into Nabisco. I took the smallest general manager job they had, running the refrigerated foods of Nabisco. And I was there for 10 years as we tried to get out from under the debt. Had a great run there in a really tough culture. You know, being part of the world's largest LBO and being on the cover of Time magazine, KKR wanted to be out of this and have it be a success. And it was difficult. It was heavy lifting. So I was there for a decade. The last 5 years, I was president of Nabisco Foods, and we had an extraordinary run. And coming out of that, I was recruited into Campbell Soup Company as president and CCO, where I was there for 10 or 11 years. Had an extraordinary run there. And then I went on to a lot of corporate activity, corporate board seats. I was chairman of Avon Products in New York for 3 years as we had to take that company apart and recreate it, which was very difficult. And then I got involved, as I've always been, but more heavily involved in the nonprofit space, where I worked with chief executives for corporate purpose. I was the chair there for over a decade. I just stepped down, although I'm still actively involved in it. And I'm very involved here in Washington, D.C., where I'm talking to you today, with the Partnership for Public Service, which is all about helping our federal leaders be the best they can be in really tough circumstances right now. I guess the last thing is I founded Conant Leadership when I left the corporate world 15 years ago. And I've been doing leadership development and training for the last 15 years. I haven't received a paycheck yet from that. That's all my work. We do charge for a few things so that we can pay our staff, but not me. And it's been incredibly rewarding work. You know, there's a quote from Stephen Covey that just sticks with me. And the quote is this: to learn and not to do is not to really learn. To know and not to do is not to really know. And so I've been blessed with my leadership journey to have learned and done, and I know it. And the same thing's true with the knowing. I know it because I've done it. I've experienced it. I'm going into year 50, my golden anniversary of corporate work in 2026. And I have a lot to offer.
Yeah, you've really found a purpose. By the way, I'm waiting for the invitation for that party that you're going to throw to celebrate your 50 years.
Well, I don't know what we're going to do. I have a whole new leadership system I'm about to champion, which builds on all my work, which will be coming out in Leader to Leader magazine, Frances Hesselbein's magazine. And it'll be coming out in April, and we're going to be having a whole new system that builds on all the work that I've done. It's called the Conant Leadership Higher Ground Leadership Success System. And it's how you, not only as an individual, but as a team and an enterprise, can get to higher ground and stay there in a way that you can feel good about. And so, I'm excited. There's so much to do. So anyway.
Well, I want to take us back to something that you said previously about Parker Brothers and your experience there. And you said, I got fired from that job and it was important. It was important learning that I got from them. So, talk a little bit more about that and what stands out most to you from that day.
I'll be happy to. I've had two moments that are seared into my mind where I felt rejection. The first moment, before I do Parker Brothers, my first performance review at General Mills 50 years ago, 6 months in, your boss fills out the performance review, and then your boss's boss typically will write a line or two and sign it also. So there are checks and balances. And my boss, I'd never worked before in an office. So I was a fish out of water, but I was determined to make it work. But my boss's boss, the one line he wrote on my first performance review, while I moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota, didn't know a soul, and my first performance review, and his one line was, "You should be looking for another job." That was his one line. I sort of soldiered through that, took it as a challenge, and persevered, and it worked out. But I'll never forget it. And then at Parker Brothers, I was director of marketing. It was a subsidiary of General Mills. And at the time, General Mills had built the world's largest toy company through a series of acquisitions. And Parker Brothers was one of its crown jewels. And it was in Boston. So my wife and our kids, we moved to Boston, and we're having a life. We had our second son. We lived in a beautiful seaside village, Marblehead, Massachusetts, birthplace of the American Navy, and we were loving it. And then one day I went into work, and the receptionist said, "The senior vice president of marketing would like to see you." And I went up to his office, and he couldn't look at me, which was saying
Usually
something.
a sign. Yeah.
And he said, "Have a seat. Doug, your position's been eliminated. You need to be out of here by noon." And I had been working for General Mills / this company for a decade, and I was out. And I packed up. I was out of there by noon. And then I had a call from the executive in charge of human resources. And he said, "Doug, actually, Larry was in such a hurry to get you out of the office, he forgot to tell you your benefits. Can I explain them to you?" At which point I said no. And I hung up the phone on him. I was so shocked. I mean, I went home to my wife, my two small children, our dogs and cats, feeling every bit the victim. It felt like my career was over in a snap, And I was home for another 2 hours, at which point I thought, I can't live like this. I better call this guy back and find out what my benefits are. And so I called him back, and he connected me with an outplacement counselor. My outplacement counselor's name was Neil McKenna, and he saved me. He was a gifted outplacement counselor. He actually ran the outplacement program for Harvard Business School for all the people that wanted to stay in Boston. And he made time for me that night. I said, "Well, I don't want to interrupt your dinner." He said, "No, you're the most important thing. I want you to come over right now, and we're going to talk this through." And I did, and he was there for me. He was there for me completely, wildly supportive of me and tough on me because I had to go through a tough process of finding myself. 2 weeks in, he said, "I want you to write your entire life story, and I want you to handwrite it."
Oh,
And
wow.
I said, "Handwrite it?" But this is before the internet. So there were typewriters, but he wanted it handwritten because he felt there was a different connection you would have to the material, which was true for me. So I said, "I don't have time to handwrite my life story. I got to get a job." He said, "On the other hand, this is the perfect time to handwrite your life story because you don't have a job. So get it done and get it to me in the next 2 weeks." So 50 pages front and back on lined notebook paper. I wrote my life story. He said, "I want everything in there. I want to know family, career. I want to know everything." And then 2 weeks later, he read it and he said, "Doug, I don't get it. I'm getting to know you and you're an extraordinary individual. But when I'm preparing you to go out on interviews, you're just answering the questions. You're playing the game. but I'm not getting any of who you really are. Your family came to this country with nothing, and there's a lot of grit and determination in what they accomplished. And that's in you too. You were a great athlete, and you've persevered through a lot of challenging times. What's going on here? And he said, I was so busy trying to play up to my parents and my grandparents and the older people in the room that I wasn't being myself. And he said, I want you to do some integrity-laden role-playing. I said, what's that? He said, that's where you're actually pretending to be yourself, as opposed to pretending to be somebody you're not. And so we did that for a while. He helped me. He was a mentor for me for 20 years. I was able to interview in a more genuine and authentic way. And ultimately, I got a job working for Kraft. But it was there where I discovered, I didn't have the words for it, that my life story was my leadership story. When I had to write my life story out, I was enough. When I read all that, when I wrote it and I read it, I realized, you are enough. You just need to live into yourself in a way where people can get to know who you really are and where you're not afraid to show that you have an appetite for growth and contribution that is second to none. You need to show up. And so I did. It was very awkward because I'm introverted, hard to believe. But Neil was my dear mentor for another 20 years until he passed away in about 2006. That's about 20 years ago, actually 20 years ago this April.
One of your friends, Brene Brown, she talks about how you can play to not lose instead of playing to win. And when you play to not lose, how ineffective that is, right? You
Absolutely.
play differently.
Yeah. Well, when I did a podcast with her, every year I pick a quote that's my favorite quote for the year, and I tend to use it throughout the year. And before I actually spoke with her, I had picked her quote out, not knowing I was even going to be talking to her. And basically, her quote is, look, you can either walk inside your story and own it, or you can walk outside your story and hustle for your worthiness every day. And she didn't say every day, but I did. And I was walking outside of my story. I wasn't living my story. I was living the story I thought everybody wanted to see. And I learned with Neil that I needed to walk inside of my story and own it.
I love it. I know one of the things that really struck me when you were talking to our cohort group over in the Higher Mission Leadership, you shared your personal story about a significant life event, an accident that occurred in your life. Would you mind sharing that story and then talk about how you began to show up differently as you returned to work?
Well, yeah, happy to. That was another pivotal time in my life. I had been CEO of Campbell for 9 years. When we were having a very good run, I had kind of slogged through the tough stuff, and the flywheel was working. And I was getting ready to spend the 4th of July weekend with my family. And a car was driving me home Friday afternoon before the 4th of July. And my driver, I think, dozed off at the wheel. I had dozed off in the back seat. And he drove into the back of a stopped dump truck. And we were going 70 to 80 miles an hour. And fortunately, the airbags deployed. He was okay. And fortunately, I had my seatbelt on. But the seatbelt crushed my torso. And they had to cut me out of the car, rush me to the Audrey Fold Trauma Center in Trenton, New Jersey, where I was in surgery for 18 hours. They tracked my wife down, brought her to the trauma center. I was in the ICU recovering, and the nurses found her, brought her in, and she wouldn't leave my side. And they kept saying, well, he could be asleep. This could take hours. And she was determined not to leave my side. They were saying, would you like to take a comfort break? I'll stay with him, but would you like to take a comfort break? And she was not going to go. The nurses told me this afterwards. And she wanted to be there when I woke up. Mm-hmm. She wanted to be there. She knew it would be important to me. And when I opened my eyes, she was right there holding my hand. She was the first thing I saw, totally disoriented. And she told me, I'm here. And it was an incredibly emotionally moving experience that I've carried with me ever since. But what I learned when I went back to work was everybody I worked with metaphorically had been in a car accident that day. They'd all had something go wrong. Everybody. Oh, I had a bad day. My kid's sick, or, I'm running late. I'm supposed to be at this big meeting. Everybody was in a metaphorical car accident every day. And what I learned was I just needed to be able to say in a full, intentional way, I'm here. I'm here for you. How can I help? Neil McKenna, when I first met him, I learned the words, how can I help?
Mm-hmm.
And every time I called him, he would say, hello, this is Neil McKenna. How can I help? There was no cell phones. There was no caller ID. I mean, anybody could have been calling him. And if you called him, you just knew his name was Neil McKenna. He was there to help. And so I took that I'm here experience with my wife and that how can I help experience with Neil McKenna, and I built it into the fabric of my life and how I chose to lead the organization. Where I was there, we had slogged through a lot of difficult things at the company, and I was just there to help take it to the next level. And it was an important experience, and it led to my, among other things, wanting to do the Higher Ambition Leadership Institute that we ran in Boston that you were part of, because I wanted to help. I was not paid for any of that work. Most of the people that were doing that were being paid. But I was just going to show up and say, how can I help? And I'm here. And it was an incredibly rewarding experience. And I think as leaders, we can't lose sight of the importance of that, of the personal leadership required to show up for people every day. Still got to make the tough decisions. But, if you want people to help you, you damn well better be in the room trying to help them. It doesn't work in an enduring way any other way. And that's one of the lessons I learned there.
Yeah, servant leadership is definitely woven into the fabric of who you are. It's one of our core values as well. And that being there, I'm here and how can I help really resonates because I try to live that, especially when things are very chaotic, right? And sometimes in that chaos, the calm comes from just being there. I know that in Hallie, one of the things you also talked about was one of the worst employee engagement surveys you ever had. And, we as leaders often rely on employee engagement surveys to kind of test the waters. Where are people thinking, where are their heads at that moment in time, knowing that there's gaps and flaws in these things, but still you can be very emotionally rocked by it, or it can hit you in certain ways. So talk a little bit about your worst engagement ever measured.
Well, it wasn't mine. Well, it was mine. I owned it. I went to Campbell Soup Company. First of all, going into KKR and the Barbarians at the Gate, world's largest LBO, it was a train wreck culturally, and engagement was not good. And I started tinkering around with that, partnering with Stephen Covey and getting some help from his team to help me build engagement there, which led to outstanding results at Nabisco. And when I got to Campbell, I thought nothing could have been worse than what I was experiencing with KKR, but it was worse. And so we immediately contacted the people at the Gallup organization to do the Q12 survey. We did it for 11 straight years. And I believe employee engagement is an excellent proxy for getting a feel for the hygiene of your culture. And many would say you can't manage it if you can't measure it. And so this created a tool for us to promote dialogue around important stuff related to our culture, and we could measure it and talk about it. So the people with the left brains could understand it, and the people with the right brains could also be part of the conversation. And we did the first Gallup survey. I knew it was bad, and I was talking to the head of the engagement, and then ultimately Jim Clifton, who owned Gallup. And I said, well, how bad is it? And he said, it's not good. And without getting into the numbers, they told me this is the worst employee engagement survey we've ever seen in a Fortune 500 company. I was feeling like we were on the front edge of getting into this employee engagement conversation, certainly in my experience. It turned out they had done it with pieces of 300 Fortune 500 companies, and ours was the worst. And
that's not a prize you want to win.
No, I mean, we were an old economy canned soup business headquartered in the poorest, most dangerous city in the United States, Camden, New Jersey. Our building was surrounded by razor wire,
Hmm.
and there were bullet holes in some of the windows.
Wow.
And Camden was a city of 75,000 people, and we had 70 murders a year in Camden.
Wow.
And the company had fallen on hard times and lost half its market value, and it was selling the same product it had been selling 100 years earlier. And so it was not in good shape, and we had the worst engagement. And that's where I established my language that I've used to this day, that you have to first win in the workplace before you can win in the marketplace. And so job one for us was to take the toxicity out of the workplace so that we could focus on the work. And so we started a program to build employee engagement in our culture. And we went from the worst employee engagement in the Fortune 500. 9 years later, we had the best employee engagement in the Fortune 500, still headquartered in Camden, New Jersey, still selling canned soup. But we had created a culture that really celebrated the individual in a way that encouraged them to bring their best selves to work every day. And they lifted our company up. They put our company on their backs and they lifted us up to a place where we created an extraordinary amount of value. And then our leadership team, through all this, we had a turnover. Difficult. First 3 years, we turned over 300 of our top 350 leaders. I don't know another Fortune 500 company that's done that, but we were in dire straits. We had to. We rebuilt it. And the one employee engagement metric that I will talk about is they believed you had to have a 12-to-1 employee engagement ratio. 12 people wildly engaged in the work for one person who was not. And basically, if you had 13 people and one person wasn't pulling their share of the load, didn't matter. The other 12 were making up for it.
Mm.
So 12-to-1 was the magic number. And at Campbell, our top 350 executives, 7 years after we'd made all the heavy lifting changes, our number was 77-to-1,
Wow.
which was unheard of.
That's
So that meant
remarkable.
like 4 people were not engaged. We had a spring in the step culture that was second to none, and we were creating value, and it promised to be enduring. So that's where I learned the power of how can I help, and just being fully present for employees, and then creating a high performance workplace that was predicated around personal relationships and high trust.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Still holding people accountable. The other language we used in that same conversation was that we had to be tough minded on standards of performance. We had no choice, but we also expected our leaders to be tender hearted with the people they worked with. And that was hard.
Mm-hmm.
They were thinking either or. And stealing a line from Jim Collins in Good to Great, we had to get them to embrace the genius of the and. You're going to be tough minded on standards and tenderhearted with the employees, and you have no choice. And we're measuring it every year, and hopefully you're going to get with the program. If you choose not to, we'll help you find another job.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do for leaders, right? To be able to balance
Ah,
both. Because if most people want to be tenderhearted about everything and take care of the
that's
people.
hard. Yeah, it's hard. Well, I wish I came up with the line. I didn't. The soft stuff is the hard stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's this feeling stuff that you have to be dialed into to be effective, but it's hard. And it's easier for leaders and managers to look at the metrics and the employee engagement score and all this, the left brain stuff. But the soft stuff is the hard stuff. And the people who are really, really good are really good at the soft stuff
Yeah.
in terms of leading people, maybe not being elected president, but in terms of leading people.
They said that recently in the survey that CEOs believe that the soft skills are the most important skills right
Yeah,
now because of the way technology is advancing. They're like, yeah, but you can't
sure.
teach how to be human to others. And
No, and by the way, you and I've talked about this, but they used to call it a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous.
mhm,
Warren Bennis, 1987. New language these days must be true because it's on Google. It's a Bonnie world now. Brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible. Those are the
mhm.
4 letters. And anxiety, and you know this, anxiety is at an all-time high.
Yes.
All-time high. Wherever you look. And if you're trying to manage an anxious culture, you damn well better be working on the soft stuff, because it's not the hard stuff. And then you've got an anxious group that's now dealing with the advent of AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's promoting more anxiety.
Yeah.
And nobody wants AI to be their boss. They want a person to be their boss, a person who actually cares about them and wants to understand them and wants to help them navigate this world. And that's all soft stuff too. There's some tough-mindedness that has to creep into that conversation. But that's not what these anxious people are looking for right now.
No, it's interesting to see the change in thinking from, when we swung the pendulum to everybody being at home and wanting to be at home. The newer generations coming out are wanting to be in office, and they recognize there are just some things that you can't teach without being face to face.
I would agree. And again, if we're going to say the soft stuff is the hard stuff, if people subscribe to that being a big part of the leadership challenge, you can't learn the soft stuff at home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You have to be in the office. You have to have the human interaction. You can learn some of it on Zoom, but in my experience, you have to be in the office part of the time. You have to be connecting with people in real time. And what's interesting to me, I work with a lot of companies still doing the work I do, and all their sales teams, they want their salespeople out with their customers, building relationships, right?
Yeah.
You probably do at Pariveda.
Yeah.
You want them
We want to be in
connected.
person, of
You want to
course.
be in person. Well, you have internal customers too, but you don't want to be in person with them?
Right.
Hello? Does that make sense? No. I think Jamie Dimon's got it right in New York, in his $3 billion headquarters building on Park Avenue. You have to make it attractive to be in work. You want people to want to come, but if they aspire to advance careers, they're not going to do it from their living room, or their home office. It's just not going to work. And sadly, some people got spoiled by this momentary blip COVID created, where we found a lifestyle that worked for us. I think we're all going to end up going back to some hybrid kind of working relationship, which will enable us to be good family people, good friends, good parents, and still be good citizens in the workplace and showing up for work. It probably isn't 5 days a week, 9 to 5 anymore, but there's room for us to have the pendulum swing back.
Yeah, I think so too. I wonder about what you said earlier. Your life story is your leadership story. And when you think about your own life story work, is there a chapter that really makes it into your formal bio, but really is a driver of who you are today?
I learned a lesson. My wife and I, when I was working for Parker Brothers, it was hard work. And we were going to a corporate event. We were flying down to Palm Beach. And it was the first time after our second son had been born. We hadn't been away, just the two of us, for years, for a couple years, we just the two of us. And so we were going down to Palm Beach for this event. And I always used to buy a hardcover book in the bookstore at the airport. It was part of my little, whatever I was in the mood to read at that moment, I would buy the book. And I bought this book and I started reading it on the plane. We're sitting in first class. My wife is having a mimosa and I'm just got my nose stuck in this book. And I'm just reading, totally ignoring her, reading this book. Then we get to the Breakers Hotel in Palm Beach. They take us up to our room. They open the doors out, looking over the water, the waves crashing on the rocks below. I mean, it's spectacular. And I sit down and I start reading this book again.
Uh-oh.
And my wife finally says, "What is wrong with you? What are you reading?" And I said to her, "This guy is brilliant." And she said, "Well, who is it?" I said, "This guy I never heard of before, 1990s. His name is Stephen Covey. This book is called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People." And, "Well, why is it so brilliant?" And I said, "Because he thinks just like I do." And which was a little presumptuous. But that's, I think all of us describe brilliant people as people that agree with us, and he was agreeing with me. So I thought he was brilliant. But what I learned there was that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I was ready to do more. I just needed somebody to help me get there. And I needed to be open to thinking differently about myself. And shortly thereafter, I was fired at Parker Brothers. And Stephen sort of started to open up the world to me in a fresh way. And then Neil McKenna showed up. I was fired. Neil McKenna showed up. And what I started learning was I needed to be committed to a journey of personal growth. And that if I didn't own it, it wasn't going to get done. So in that, there's this growth journey we all go on. You go on it. We all go on it.
Absolutely.
And there was a man born in Florence, South Carolina, as I recall, born in 1901, died in 1970, and was known as one of the founders of the Harlem Renaissance. And he coined the phrase, if it is to be, it is up to me. 10 two-letter words. And years later, I heard a motivational speaker put the dashes on the screen, said there are 10 two-letter words that are going to determine how you feel about your life journey. And we were all trying to figure out what are the 10 two-letter words. Nobody got it. And he said, if it is to be, it is up to me. And that was another, to me, stroke of brilliance. I needed to own my journey. I needed to commit to learning and growth personally. I couldn't wait for my boss to do it for me, or the head of HR to do it for me, or my parents to do it. The buck stopped here. But one has to really double down on their personal journey, which is what we try and do in my Blueprint Bootcamp and what we did at Halley, because these are choppy seas we're in. And if you're not really well anchored to who you are and how you want to show up and how you want to learn, grow, and contribute, you're going to get lost at sea. So that's the piece that I probably haven't written enough about yet.
You know,
never said that before that way. So you heard it here first.
right here, everybody. Doug, that line you shared, if it is to be, it is up to me, really resonates. And the way you described leading through the choppy seas, staying anchored in who you are so you don't drift, feels like a good place to pause this first part of our conversation. Now, in part 2, we pick up right here and go deeper into your executive coaching and personal leadership model, which to date has supported 50 individuals in stepping into their own CEO roles. So we'll see you back here for part 2. Thanks for listening to Doing Good by Doing Better. I'm Margaret Rogers, CEO of Pariveda, and I hope this conversation offered you a new way to take your ideas to impact. Follow on Apple or Spotify and join us every other week as we keep learning how to do good by doing better.